I'm going to be moderating this part of it, and the questions were screened by League of Women Voters screeners, and we do that in all of our forums. And the first question was directed to the League, and the question is, I am curious if you invited others tonight, such as the Port, North Point, or the labor unions. And I think I kind of covered that in my introduction of what our purpose was, but I'm going to let Christine go ahead and discuss that a little bit more.
This presentation is really part of our League public information. We have it open to the public tonight, and everyone is invited to listen. We have had many dialogues and been studying the port for some time, and we felt like we wanted to get the information that we have publicly available out for you to see. There have been many other presentations by the port to legislators and to some people in the community, but they haven't included the details that we went into tonight.
So the port has contracted with a firm in Portland called JAL, and they have a contract with them, and JAL will be offering more opportunities to learn about the project. It's not clear to me yet exactly how that's going to happen. I think they're just beginning to put the work together. So there will be opportunities to hear from the port, from the labor unions, and from others associated with this project or interested in this project in the near future, I'm hoping.
We appeared before the Port Commission at their most recent meeting and made a personal invitation to the Port Commission and the Port staff to attend this evening's meeting. And I personally invited Brian Clem from the North Point representative that's the proposed terminal developer, and he was unable to attend this evening.
Okay, the second question is what efforts have been made by the Port of Coos Bay to provide information and address questions? And I believe that question is a little bit out of our scope, but would any of you like to answer it?
Yeah, I think I just did, that they have contracted with the Portland firm JAL, who were actually here in the end of last year doing some questioning of people what they were concerned about or what they were interested in or what they wanted to know about the project. And so that will continue through the contract that the port has with that company, and the port will be able to provide, I'm sure, more information about how that's going to happen in the near future.
There is an enormous amount of information on the port's website.
I'll point out that the information that is on the port's website about this project is specifically about the navigation channel aspect. There is much less information about the terminal and the PCIP project itself.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mike. This question, if goods are to be sent to Portland by rail, why not send container ships directly to Portland?
That's really a question I don't think we can answer. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of that reply because we're just looking, remember, at the publicly available information. And there's nothing associated with that, but that would be a question I would like, remember, we will take these questions to the port so that they will know what this audience is interested in and maybe get some information about that from them.
I can offer an update that one of the governor's priority budget items this year is to provide $20 million of additional support to reactivate container service to Terminal 6, which is the Port of Portland's container terminal. The Port of Portland does have a container terminal, but it's suffered from underutilization. And there's an effort right now to try and reactivate services. And the Ways and Means Committee of the Legislature just yesterday had a hearing where the Port of Coos Bay and the Port of Portland were posed with very similar questions to the one that was just asked.
Thank you. The next question is about cost. What is the likelihood and magnitude of cost overruns? Crystal ball time.
Well, I think we need to get a solid fix on the actual predicted costs, because the cost estimates, as Jan's presentation pointed out, have varied substantially. And again, this is a proposal that is in development. There is, right now, there's nearly $100 million of additional funds lined up for planning and additional studies. So one would certainly hope that that investment will provide additional clarity and tighten up some of the estimates. But Jan's presentation suggested that one cost estimate was $1.7 billion and another cost estimate was $4.3 billion. So that's a huge variability right now. So it suggests that we really haven't settled or haven't done sufficient planning to get a solid fix on what the actual costs are. There is, in that $4.3 billion cost estimate, I didn't know if you noticed, but there was an 18% contingency fund as a budget item.
The next question, Oregon revised statutes say that the port is to help develop economic activity in the area, not limited to transportation or marine business. Our hospital is dying. A private equity firm is in the solution so far. Can the port help to get it on a sound financial basis again?
Our study group certainly didn't address that, but that's a question we could forward to the port.
Freshwater. How much fresh water is estimated to run the port? How will that affect our water supply?
Container operations are really pretty clean as far as their water requirements. The goods come in dry sealed containers, they're transferred across. I think the only real freshwater issue that is worth consideration is not how this would play a role in our drinking water supply, but there will be a very much increased hard surface over on the North Spit. So stormwater runoff and additional runoff into the bay, I think, would be more of an issue than it would be for drinking water.
This question, what are the actual number of employees expected to operate the PCIP? And the second part of that is how much revenue is expected annually?
The estimates that I have been tracking, I've been tracking employment estimates, and they have varied widely. They've varied as widely as the budget estimates have. So I don't really feel that I'm in a position to speak to the number of the employment. There's quotes given for locally sourced jobs, jobs that would be actually associated with the terminal. But consider that this is a rail line that would go to Eugene. There will be people who will be working in the rail yard in Eugene that will be associated with this project, and then onward from there. So I'm not an expert, and none of our study members are experts on how you translate 2 million containers a year into jobs. I don't know if you count the jobs on the ships, that sort of thing. So we can transfer that question to the court and ask for clarification.
And has there been a number of how much revenue is expected annually in the port, PCIP?
No, the planning is nowhere close to that of what would happen.
The next question, who has the authority to make this PCIP happen or not happen?
Well, the port project is overseen by the Port Commission. And so we have asked that question, and the Commission will when will you decide that this is going to go forward or not going forward? So again, we are not the people to decide that, but I think the commissioners, it is their responsibility as the oversight that is appointed by the governor to manage the affairs.
The Port of Coos Bay is a special district, like a sanitary district or a sewer district or a water district. So it's got a tax base that is the shape of the Coos watershed. The Port Commission, who's responsible for administering the revenue that's generated from the taxes within the district, are appointed by the governor. And so they are vested with the responsibility of prioritizing the nature and the types of projects that are undertaken by the port.
The next question is about fishing. Will this project kill the fishing and clamming industries?
Well, I'm particularly interested in fishing, and I explicitly stated that my presentation was not going to address the impacts on fishing. So that, I believe, is subject matter for another future community conversation.
Employees, what % of employees who are current residents would be hired permanently?
We can roll that question into the jobs clarification questions.
Okay, this one's for you, Mike, since you happen to have the microphone anyway. Will deeper dredging cause greater flooding or wave action during tsunami conditions?
When you increase this, the size of a pipe, let's just think of a pipe. When you double the size of the pipe, you can quadruple the amount of water that flows in a pipe. So think of the estuary as a pipe that has an open top. So water will propagate more freely as the tides come and go in and out of the estuary. There'll be less friction because the channel will be deeper. So water will propagate more freely. There was a seminar at the Marine Biology Station of a person who studies the geology of this area, a scientist from the University of Oregon. And I posed the question to them about how would a deeper channel change how a tsunami may propagate into the estuary. And he said that probably isn't really much of a concern because the tsunami would just sweep over the North Spit.
The next question, what issues since 1960 have kept this PCIP from being built, and do any of them exist today? For example, money, technology not available, pollution, animal extinction.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. That's the easy part. What issues since 1960 have kept this PCIP from being built, and do any of them exist today?
Well, again, the Port Authority has entertained the prospect of establishing a container terminal a number of times, initially not in the 1960s, but in 2006, and in the 1980s. None of those proposals actually came to pass. I don't know the explicit reasons why they didn't, but clearly the circumstances have changed since the 2006-2007 Maersk proposal, which is the most recent one, because that proposal was coupled with the proposal to build a berth for liquefied natural gas tankers next to the Roseburg terminal. And so the economic downturn, the recession in 2008, really changed the economic picture for that inquiry about the Maersk terminal up at River Mile 7 or 8. So it was the recession that was responsible for the most recent, in part at least, for the most recent decision to not go forward. Obviously, we have very changing conditions now with tariffs and taxes on Chinese-oriented vessels that will have to be figured into the calculus of this project.
What market analysis has the port or anyone else commissioned that shows the PCIP makes economic sense?
So one of the studies that's on the port website, I think it's either Appendix E or Section E, is actually an economic study. We did not talk about that this evening, but if you're interested, you should go to the port website and look at that study. That's a study that they commissioned to send to the Army Corps of Engineers to justify why we should deepen and widen the Federal Navigation Channel.
How do we know the project will benefit our community when we have no hard data or justification for claimed employment?
Well, just these economic studies that Jan was referring to are cost-benefit analyses, and they are detailed to say what are the costs involved and what are the benefits, and it depends on the geography of where you're scoping your cost benefit. And so those decision points are going to be in the public domain to review the draft cost benefit analysis. And there are not guidelines really per se to say how much in the local community versus the greater community, but it has to calculate.
The economic study that was done for the navigation channel is required by the Army Corps of Engineers because when you consider the Army Corps of Engineers does flood control levees, they do lakes and reservoirs, they do inland waterway navigation. Third parties like the Port of Coos Bay or other port authorities or flood control authorities are making requests of the Corps of Engineers all the time. And so the Corps of Engineers has some policies that say you need to demonstrate the benefits of the project. And the way the Corps of Engineers evaluates the benefits of the project is that has to be in the national economic interest. That's different than the regional or local economic interest. So the transfer of economic activity from one location, like Oakland to Coos Bay, is not necessarily something that the Corps of Engineers considers in the national economic interest, because it's just transferring an economic activity from one place to the other. The Corps of Engineers is interested in making these multi-billion-dollar investments only if it shows a positive benefit to the nation's economic interests.
How was the impact of the maximum predicted tsunami height considered?
Well, there isn't a published study as yet that addresses tsunami inundation. So at this point, I'm not aware that there's any publicly available information. I'm also not necessarily aware that there is any specific requirement to consider that. It would certainly be in a risk assessment to determine whether or not this facility would be able to achieve insurance. This is a very costly capital investment that will involve certainly government investment, but also private financing that will be financed over an extended period of time. So I would expect the people that are underwriting that financing will certainly need to take that into consideration.
Okay, then we'll shift gears here. Will eminent domain be used in Reedsport? And that's for ODOT.
Not to my knowledge. The proposed overcrossing is within existing ODOT right-of-way. We're going to build it on retaining walls. So acquiring additional right-of-way is not identified as part of the project.
This question is for anyone. Where will all the necessary workers be housed in this area? that one.
We would have to think about, additional housing, but there is no information at this point about that.
This question is, what will happen to the quality of life of the homes directly across from this facility in Empire?
Certainly, there will be some additional noise and light. Right now, the North Spit, the only noise I can think that happens is the ATVs that go up and down the inside of the bay. So there will be a difference in noise and light.
The hollering place is actually on the North Spit, and that choice was because that is the narrowest part of the bay, and they would holler across to get portage to come to the land base in Empire. So there is really good transfer of noise from that particular point because it's the narrowest point in the estuary.
What do you anticipate will happen to the air quality of the area?
All of these models, we don't have any models for that. Certainly there's emission standards and everything. You can just look at, having grown up in LA Long Beach area, there's a lot of studies locally, but our area is unique with the amount of winds that we have, and you'd have to have a good model for what sort of interactions and pollution you'd have.
The vessels, there would be two sources of emissions that would contribute to air quality. One would be emissions from the locomotives, and the other would be emissions from the ships. These ships are global transits. They're 60% of the fleet's made vessels that were built in China. They travel all over the world. They are subject to International Maritime Organization standards. And the International Maritime Organization has just in the past week introduced emissions reduction standards that are the most aggressive in the history of the industry. The emissions from the container shipping industry is about 12% of the global emissions, about the size of Germany. Right now, or 3%, excuse me, Jan clarifies. Right now, the conventional vessels use this material called heavy fuel oil for their transits, but while in port, they're required to use a much lower emissions fuel. So their main engines will be shut down and they will run on generators. So the ships do take measures to control pollution when they're at port. And again, this PCIP is proposing to offer shore power, electric shore power for the vessels. But as Jan pointed out, right now only 3% of the fleet is capable of plugging in.
Next question, will this affect the airport?
We can pose that question. The airport runway approach for the east-west runway does pass over that portion of the North Spit. And so there's sort of an airway highway of sorts for planes that are coming in on that approach. And you can imagine that they started up higher elevation out over the ocean and diminish as they approach the end of the airport runway.
The Federal Aviation Authority will determine that kind of information, and they haven't, as far as I can tell, I haven't seen anything that will that has yet come out from them. So that would be the authority for any kind of regulation that might need to happen.
Will the project help greenlight an LNG project?
I'm not going there, but I'm pretty, I don't know.
I can't see a connection at this point, and there certainly hasn't been any publicly available information that would demonstrate a connection. That marketplace has changed dramatically since this community entertained that as a possibility. The proposed expanded navigation channel would be appropriately sized to accommodate liquefied natural gas ships.
What is the ETA on if this will actually happen?
So if you look on the port's website, I think there's some information about that, permitting in the next 2 to 3 years, building in the next 3 to 4 years after that. So thinking out 7, maybe 8 years, 6, 7, 8 years.
Will the new railroad bridge going to Horsefall have to be redone?
You mean over the North Spit? I mean over...
The North Spit, right, Horsefall.
I'll try to answer this. So when we did the study, one of the things that we were looking at is there's like 3 separate things going on with this port expansion. The part we were focused on is the port's going to upgrade the rail line from Coos Bay to Eugene. And that's going to include bridges, tunnels, and things of that nature to support the heavier trains. One of the things that, the reason we did the Reedsport study, those crossings are going to be constructed as part of the rail line upgrade. Now that's going to occur regardless of the port expansion or not, because they're already securing federal money for that. So I believe that you will see the rail line be upgraded. Whether the port project happens or not, that's a separate issue.
I'm not sure I understand this question, but maybe you will. What will the increased trains do to the boardwalk and north and south docks?
Well, the train traffic will be constrained to the North Spit, and so it will go back and forth from the North Spit directly toward Reedsport. So there won't be, to my understanding, a huge change or any change at all in the downtown Coos Bay section of the rail line. There's the proposed PCIP project doesn't even talk about an upgrade for the swing bridge that goes over Coos Bay at North Bend, because that's not considered part of the PCIP project.
Is the facility going to be too small for the amount of containers by the time it's built?
Well, we did point out that the global fleet of vessels is increasingly growing. So the capacity of individual ships has grown substantially since 2006. The Panama Canal has been expanded, and that's allowed these post-Panamax Generation 3 ships. That meant that the amount of containers that an individual ship could carry went from 8,000 to 13,000 containers because of the increased size of the Panama Canal. But there's a lot of traffic that doesn't use any canals, the Asia to West Coast North America. There's big ports in Mexico, there's Los Angeles, there's Oakland. All those ports are capable of handling ships that can carry 24 or 25,000 containers. Now, if we have landing tariffs where it costs $1.5 million or $800 a ton, depending on which week you listen to these changes that are being advanced by the current administration, there will be tremendous pressure to have fewer vessel calls because each vessel call will add cost. So I foresee that the current policies are going to encourage larger vessels that were not built in China to call on fewer ports. So Jan showed those liner services. They run like a bus route. You stop at 2 or 3 ports in Asia, you go across to North America, you do 2 or 3 ports there, and then you go back to Asia again. I think what the current policies will do will put a priority emphasis on megaports.
This is another ODOT question. What about Lakeside, all the side roads, I'm assuming railroad crossings, off 101 and 126? And they're talking noise, light, pollution, as well as crossing time.
So ODOT only looked at the state highways that the railroad tracks were going to be crossing. That's Reedsport. But that's a good question, and we brought that up with the city of Lakeside. That the rail line does go through Lakeside, but that's not a state facility. So where the city of Lakeside is in addressing that issue, I'm not aware of.
How will property values be affected by noise and light pollution from PCIP?
We'll forward that one to the port.
This question is a little long. With the improvements to the railroad, can it also be made a priority to bring a passenger train to link Coos Bay to Eugene? This should be incorporated into the process if it will happen anytime soon. Please take this seriously and don't put it off. It's a true and very important give back to the community.
I'm aware of a group of people very interested in seeing passenger service reestablished up in not Reedsport, but in the Florence area. They've been interested in this for a very long time. The railroad as it's currently configured really wouldn't be satisfactory for passenger service. It requires higher standards than for freight, and a lot of changes would need to be done for that. It sounds like an interesting ride to me. Not sure.
How are we doing for time? Okay, how about two more questions? Are hazardous materials going through downtown Coos Bay?
The PCIP project will not have rail transport going through Coos Bay itself. It starts on the north spit, it goes over into Lakeside, and then into Reedsport, and then up to Eugene. So, no.
There's several more kind of trainee questions here, and I think we sort of answered them, but you mentioned noise and light impacts. How many hours per day would this occur? As a train? No, not a train question. I've got a bunch of train questions, but I chose another one. I'm sorry.
Well, one of the slides indicated it was a 24-hour day process, but Steve, in his communications with our union workers, we don't think it would be 24 hours a day unloading and offloading because of the union situation. But we don't know. I mean, we're, again, answering questions that we don't have real data for.
But we will pass these questions on. I'm going to ask one more because it's a great question. Where's all the money coming from?
Well, there's federal money that's been in this, and we've showed you the statistics. There's more money request planned. The state has applied and received considerable funding from the port, from bond measures and other sources. We believe there's a general fund request that Jan put on her slide, and I'll let her finish that.
There's really two main sources of state funds. Right now, the majority of the state funds that the port is working with are lottery bond funds that are administered through Oregon Business. But there's also general funds, which are the tax dollars, general state tax dollars, that are also a source of state funds. Federal funds have come from several sources. The study for the container terminal project will be funded with federal funds. for one source, the Infra Grant Program. I don't remember what that acronym stands for. And then the rail crossing, the additional $29 million, $24 million will be for the railway planning, $4 million for the Reedsport overpass project. So $29 million for the rail part, and then there's the federal funds for the design of the terminal are $29 million, 25, excuse me, 29 for the railroad. And then there will be a non-federal cost share that will be provided by North Point, and I don't have the exact figures for it. Yes, the federal grants require a non-federal cost share, and that will probably be addressed with the bond funds and the general funds from the state and from North Point.
Okay, I want to thank our panel. These people have spent an enormous amount of time in the weeds trying to figure out what's going on, and I thank them. I want to thank all of you for coming and becoming more informed, and we will pass on all of your questions to the port, believe me.